Hello world, welcome to the PG.biz podcast with your hosts, me, Brian Baglow, and the effervescent and futuristic Miss Peggy Ann Sulls. Hello Peggy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Brian, and thanks so much for the intro because that's what it's about. It's about the future. I mean, here we are in Q1. It's an amazing year. This is going to be a great series. It's going to give people a roadmap for all of that, which is what we do. We look at the topics that you need. We're looking at mega trends in the year, and it just dawned on me. We have a guest who is mega because he is the founder of Mega Studio. Right? So there is a tie there. It's not just me stretching it.
Nicely done.
Nicely done.
Nicely done.
And that is the name. I didn't make it up. And our guest, Adam Jaffe. Adam, it is great to have you because you are that, right? We're talking about mega. You have had nearly 30 experiences in growth and marketing. When I'm reading LinkedIn, from Playtika to Social Point, it just runs like a thread throughout what you're doing that you are deeply, deeply into gamification. And I think we're lucky to have you today. So great to have you, Adam.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Peggy. It's absolutely fantastic to be here. Looking forward to this talk.
So I'm thrilled that you're here and would love to hear more about you, about Mega and what you're doing. So let's start with you. You're in Barcelona. So what took you to Barcelona? And tell us a little bit more about Mega.
Yeah, so I started my career in gaming about 16, 17 years ago in the real money casino space in Israel. And then I caught a lucky break by joining Playtika very early. I was the number 10 employee and built and ran the marketing department by myself for the first year of the company, which was insane. We were on tons of platforms, just grew that business. And then in 2014, I was offered the opportunity to move to Barcelona to become the VP of marketing at Social Point. And that's what originally brought me out here. And beautiful city for those of you who've been here. I think that was basically their intention at the beginning. They were like, hey, listen, come to Barcelona. And I'm thinking, there's no way we're going to move. My wife is pregnant. I've got a small child. Like, the joke's on these guys. And here I am. And as far as Mega Studio goes, about 3 years ago, I founded the studio. Basically, we're set up as a pseudo gaming agency with the orientation to basically provide gaming services from coming up with ideas for games all the way through to live operations. And throughout that thread, one of the kind of core tenets is this idea of gamification, right? Do more with what you have. So, a lot of businesses rely heavily on, of course, marketing spend to acquire users, and that's expensive, and it's not getting any cheaper. And so gamification is a way of helping to align essentially what you're doing to how you can be more profitable by creating more engaging, environments. And I think that actually ties in well with the themes that we're going to be talking about today, specifically around incentivized traffic and how you can help guide users' motivations to take certain actions and elicit certain responses.
So, what led you down the gamification route?
So I was working with Jam City at the time. I'd had my own startup and we were not doing super well. And so I needed to make a bit of cash on the side. And so I ended up joining Jam City as a consultant, helping them on the marketing side with a whole kind of marketing creative strategy. And I was given the opportunity, because of my marketing background, they wanted to bring back some of their old sort of legacy titles. And they sent me down to Argentina to help kind of oversee a couple of games that were based there, which was their sort of legacy studio. And it was the first time that I was given a substantial budget for marketing, but then I was also put in charge of the product roadmap. And it was a very different experience in the sense that I wasn't bound by your traditional, like, this is my marketing guy and I have to talk to the product team and figure out what they're doing. No, I had everything. What I was basically looking at is, okay, we need marketing dollars. We know how much costs for us to acquire a user. We know kind of generalized KPIs. And now we look at the product to basically try to optimize that payback period. And it was through that process of building out specific features that would then allocate to monetization or retention that we really started to dig into this idea of how does a feature really define a group of motivational characteristics. And from this, I went on to become the CEO of another live ops studio that was based in Romania. And then that's kind of what led me to this. And since then, I've kind of brought that concept to a lot of different companies, helping them take existing games and really try to sit down and say, you have this type of motivation. but you don't have a feature to support it. You seems like you have a very competitive product, but you don't have any leaderboards to basically propel players or push players in a more visually competitive nature. Or you have a game like a match 3, for example, but you don't have any like skill training style components, like for example the star system, where you can say, oh yeah, you did very well on this level, which may not sound like a core feature, but users who really like perfection and getting that like 3-star system, they'll spend money for that, to save that progress, and aka like the out of moves purchase. So it was about kind of diving into this world of understanding that a certain feature really ties into a certain motivation, and this is the gamification loop, right? How you figure out what motivates a player and have enough of those touch points to push your product forward.
But I want to just go back for a moment to the whole idea here of incent, rewarded, gamification. It's clearly an opportunity for game devs, and we'll be talking about that. But to grasp it, you have to also get past, and you hinted at it, Brian, there's that little stigma about this type of traffic. So clue us in here, Adam. What's the biggest misconception about this?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that it's all fraud, and that you're basically paying for boosting your position in the App Store, which is essentially how it all started, right? I mean, if you think of these companies back in the day, 2010, 12, 13, 14, whatever, where you say, hey, we'll get you to the top of the App Store with X number of downloads, and you basically just paid for that. I think that's how people initially approached it, and then they took it to the next level, which was, hey, listen, pay for the install, but then we'll also pay for an event, like reach level 15 and you'll get an even bigger payout, which again places all the onus and emphasis on the developer. We take on full ownership, and we take on the full burden of responsibility in terms of payback. And again, a lot of fraud was taking place there because the publisher had really zero risk. As long as they're sending traffic, there was nothing to sort of keep them honest in that context. But that whole system has really shifted dramatically in the last couple of years. And you have a lot of companies now which are taking the rewarded and the incentive away from the advertiser, and they're placing it back on their shoulders. For example, you might have a company that has, yes, you'll pay me on a CPI, so you pay me, the advertising company, on CPI, but the user knows that if they reach a certain level, they're going to get a reward from me, from the publisher. So I'll give them a $5 gift card, or I'll give them a voucher, or I'll give them something. So the incentive, the onus of the incentive shifts slightly away from the advertiser, the game developer, and onto the shoulders of the publisher, the media company. This transition of burden of responsibility has really led to a kind of renaissance in this traffic source, because now you've got two parties who are really concentrated on the quality. I mean, I know now companies that run incent networks that do proper KYC, like a bank, because they're so concerned about having quality inventory, and that was like completely unheard of. And in fact, it's actually probably even more relevant in terms of quality than your typical non-incent stuff, because the incentive can, in certain cases, negatively affect the business. If you get a lot of people doing, fraudulent activity, it can affect the advertiser relationship, but also on the publisher side. So both parties are now much more vigilant. And it's created a pretty interesting ecosystem where companies in the past may have not thought about incentives like a proper, UA channel. Now you're seeing companies spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's a completely viable channel for both ROAS, which is of course the key metric that most companies are looking for, but also for bringing quality users. I mean, ROAS is typically a lag indicator on that. But you see companies now really building an entire business model around incentivized traffic. That is to say, you also need to understand the traffic itself. It doesn't behave the same as other traffic sources. And so I know a lot of companies will set out with this idea like, okay, we're spending millions of dollars all over the place. Oh, we haven't really touched incent. Let's bring it in. We've heard it's great. And then it doesn't work for them. And they're like, okay, that's it. It's done. And the reality is that it often or more typically doesn't work because the game itself isn't designed for that type of traffic. And there's a certain kind of vibe and setup that you want to put down in order to maximize the value you get from that type of traffic source.
I get the mechanics of reward, and I've been watching it, as long as you have. But this shift, this change, now that is something important, and that's something that studios need to understand if they're going to use this as a UA channel. So what do they need to understand about the traffic? What's the nuts and bolts here of making this work?
So it varies, between iOS and Android. I think in the one side, I'm not going to call it deprecation of IDFA, but the significant reduction of that as a deterministic indicator for tracking has caused and played havoc on the behavioral targeting side. And what incentivized, so you tend to have lower CPMs on iOS just because of the sort of blind nature of that product. Not to mention in the incentivized side, and this remains true regardless of whether you had ATT or not. Most, if not all, incentivized traffic is going to come from web. So it's not coming from in-app because iOS, of course, doesn't allow companies like Tapjoy or Fluent or anybody to have that SDK for games. You can still have incentive. You can still earn money from incentivized offers, for example, for content, like take a subscription to this, like to SiriusXM or to Disney. That's okay, but for some reason, the promotion of games still has a kind of weird connotation in Apple. Android, totally fine. So you can have your own app. You can build out a whole platform based on that. So when thinking about that these are really different sources and how to leverage these traffic sources, you have to understand that a person is going to enter your product not because of your product. They have a very clear trajectory, and it's like, I need to get from point A to point B. And when I get to point B, I receive my gift card, my payout, my voucher, my whatever. And so I need to have that sense. And so as game developers, the problem has been historically that you paid for an install. And then that's basically, we're like, okay, some people might be interested in the game, but the reality is that they have a very low retention past day 2 or 3. But with these new traffic sources and this new kind of system built in, you can have basically much better looking quality traffic than you might even find in a non-incent type environment. The problem you have with that is that those users are still going for a specific goal. And that goal is not necessarily to play your game, but to reach a specific point. And so it's up to the game designer to understand that, hey, listen, I've got now a captive audience who is going to play my game and play it a lot in certain cases and get to this very kind of clear mark in the sand. And so I want to make sure that my experience, for example, might have a lot more ad-heavy relationship, right? They're not maybe going to convert as much to paying customers, although they may. In certain types of games, you actually do see very good conversion rates to paying customer if they know that they need to get to that. If they equate the value of the purchase to lower than the value that they're going to generate, they'll make a purchase. And so you get a kind of more savvy style individual, which you can completely leverage and make usage of. And so it's about understanding that you put a path forward for a user, and now you have a near guarantee that person will follow that path, unlike most games where it's much more, I don't want to call it open world, it's not exactly the case, but you have a lot less control over how a person is going to interact with your product, unless you completely rail your tutorial type environment, in which case you're going to churn most players. Nobody likes that. But Incent isn't like that. You get that railed environment, and that's a key differentiator.
So Adam, that's really interesting, and I think one of the key things here is that what you're talking about when it comes to incentivization within a game is it's taking it out of the hands of the marketing team and involving the designers and developers and making it a far more integral part of the reward mechanism within the game. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. If you think about this sort of pipe now as sort of a destination known, a typical marketer might choose a certain level or an event to say, okay, this is the level that we might need. But then the game designer might have an entirely different perspective on that. For example, and what you see a lot is a sort of bifurcation of the user journey. One is going to get this sort of a typical game environment, whereas an incentivized user will get typically a lot more ads because you almost guarantee that they're going to follow that journey. And it becomes a kind of arbitrage game at that point. You sort of know what your CPMs are, you know more or less how many impressions. But there's a second characteristic here, which is something in game we call the artificial pinch point. It's the moment in a freemium experience when a user either has to wait or pay. And if they have to wait, they need to come back. And if they pay, they can continue on in the process. And so setting up your incentivized event to be sort of post artificial pinch point is a very strong way for the user to experience a lot of value in the game. And I've seen this happen in a lot of products. A good incentivized setup sees the user monetize aggressively through ads, hit that wall, right? And they think, okay, I'm not going to pay. That's not what I'm here for. They leave, they come back, but then now they're coming back for a second session. And now what happens in a typical game environment? Well, your live ops kicks in. So now you have your welcome bonuses and you have a tournament maybe starting and all of this new things are happening. And then the person hits that event and they get their little credit, but they've now amassed all of these resources and things and they have maybe 10 or 15 more minutes of gameplay available to them. And they go on to continue playing and then they maybe even forget about the credit event and just continue on in the gaming experience. And so the historical context was focus on the marketer. That's the main objective. Now I see incentive as needing both the marketing team and the product team to come together to really align on the clear path that you want that person to take.
So we're talking about, again, another point that we hear reasonably often, which is the whole concept of the metagame. It's no longer just what's happening within each level or what's happening within each particular campaign, but it's looking at the game in its broadest possible sense. And really kind of the focus is now on the player and segmenting your players so that every single one of them, whether they're incentivized or not, are getting the kind of the maximum what they want out of that game to increase that LTV, increase your ROAS and just really keep everyone as happy as is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are certain companies that have even more information. There are companies that do surveys before you get to that traffic source, before they send that user on. And in those types of instances, you can actually generate your own sort of device graph or behavioral targeting, asking questions that are more relevant. So companies that have surveys, I always encourage the advertisers that I deal with, see what kind of questions are being asked. How much information do you know about the user? Can you ask them a question like, do you like match 3 games, or are you interested in these types of games? And if you can funnel that kind of traffic, you also have the ability today to put in more than one event to pay out on. So you might have multiple campaigns with multiple endpoints. So maybe you have a catch-all style traffic where you're like, look, if it's broad, we can just send everybody to this event. It's more or less what we want. And you're talking very, very much about this idea of meta drivers, and we think about this idea of gamification. So we might find that a certain traffic source that you're purchasing from, it has a certain type of user. And you know that your game, for example, is more of a competitive product. And what you really want to do is you want to match that incoming user with the event that maximizes your sort of moment of meta. So if we have a leaderboard type of instance, which is going to become available at level 4, well, then maybe you should put that sort of credit event after level 4 so that the user will experience that part of your game because you feel that traffic source might drive that type of user to your product. It's a little bit different kind of methodology of thinking, but if you think about each type of feature you have in your product as tying into a specific meta driver, or in this context, a specific user motivation, and numbers of users are motivated by different things, if you have a better sense of the incoming traffic, then you can apply certain level types or different events that might behoove that individual more to convert. And that's a little bit what you get to do with incent. You don't really get to do that with non-incent traffic because you don't have a clear sense of where that person's going to end up. Whereas here, you're like, I'm going to draw you on this line. I'm going to push you right here. And I'm hoping that is going to be the moment where you realize, oh, I actually really enjoyed this experience. And now they have a leaderboard and I'm super into that. So I'm going to keep playing and kick off into a whole new campaign or whatever it might be.
Sounds like a whole new idea and a whole new area to sort of let go and be creative and try to figure this out, because you're building a pathway to profits in a sense. Maybe not that they're going to convert, but you're going to make money, and you can architect this and you can guide this. And this gets really interesting, but it can be also really challenging. What are maybe some, I wouldn't say the coolest events, but maybe the events, maybe the triggers, maybe those moments that you could offer to really sort of inspire these companies to think a little bit out of the box, because this is a whole new skill set?
It's a really complex question because there isn't one sort of golden metric. It's not like, oh, reach level X and you'll be great. Every game is a little bit different. But I think that's also the beautiful part about this type of traffic source, is that it requires you to really sit down and look at the product that you're either promoting or want to buy traffic for, right? And to really say, okay, listen, I know the kind of traffic I'm going to get is X, and I have no illusions about the kind of quality I'm about to receive. But that doesn't mean that I can't build the right path and find that moment in my game, which I feel personally sort of highlights the best of all of what we have, without being so far from that installed position that we just don't even get anybody clicking on the offer, for example. And so there is a kind of fine tuning, if you, for example, if I have an install and then I know that this is going to take me 2 days to get to this point, and that's my credit event or the moment where I can make I get my cash reward or whatever it might be. Well, 2 days is a long time. You might just have a lot of drop off there. And even before that happens, a person might read the offer language and they might think, I don't really want to wait 2 days. It seems like a long time. I might be much more willing to take something that I can achieve in a couple of hours, And so it's important that on the face of it, you make your offer competitive in terms of the language. So you're choosing an event which feels close. So rather than say something like reach level 600, you'll say, get to world 2. And those may be the same thing, but in the mind of the user, that has a different connotation. And then the second thing is pairing the event in a sort of an effective time range. And so, and making sure that user has a sense that they can achieve it, but that there's this sort of stopgap that's introduced, aka your artificial pinch point that we talked about.
I have to ask a follow-up since you've worked with so many companies, and I'm talking about surprises. Like, what has blown your mind?
I think what was interesting to me was just how willing most incentive users are to engage with whatever mechanic you've presented to them. It's been my experience in the past that incentive traffic is a very high top of funnel style experience in which most players, if not all players, will churn immediately upon installing the product, and so you get this very kind of trickle down effect, and it's not a very profitable mechanism. But when you start to see these companies pulling those users deeper and deeper into your funnels, I'm always shocked at just how willing they are to watch 40 ads, or even make purchases or go to the 30th or 50th level in one session. And so you start to see these retention rates day 5, day 6, day 7 of 20, 30, 40% higher than even your non-incent stuff. And you're like, wow, this is actually an incredibly lucrative traffic source. And that you can then sort of manipulate that process more effectively. And I think that always strikes me as like, oh wow, like I wouldn't be willing to do that, but then all of a sudden I get this incentive and I'm like, yeah, I will do all of it plus whatever else you throw in.
What you're saying is that this is actually simplifying things for developers, because when you know your user, you know the incentive that your user has for coming into your game, you can deploy all of your strategy, all of your tactics within the game to not only get them there, but keep them thereafter.
Yeah, and it becomes a little bit of whack-a-mole to a degree, right? Like you're trying to figure out, right, what's the right strategy and what's the right mechanism in order to engage. Because with incentivized traffic, you're trying to basically use your gamified elements to mask the traffic that you brought in. So you're like, I came in for this. I've always talked about, I came for this, but I stayed for that. And that's typical for basically all games, right? I came because I saw this amazing banner and I thought, wow. And then I stayed because there's a cool chat room and I'm like really engaged in this, or a collectible system, or whatever that meta thing is. That's why I'm actually playing the game and spending money. And incentivized traffic is a little bit the same, right? You recognize that a person is not coming in for your game. They're coming in for some other purpose, to receive coins or reward or whatever in some other product. And so it's up to you as the game designer and along with the marketing team to be like, okay, what foot do we put forward? What gamified element do we place in front of this user in order to remove that, I got to just churn and bounce back to the game I was playing and keep them engaged in the product that I have them with, or that I have them in now. And so, yeah, it is a very interesting opportunity because you can test a lot of different things. You can go and say, listen, maybe it's better to put them in front of the leaderboard first, or maybe we can, send them down the collectible route, or maybe we'll put them in the tournament. And you can start to gauge what feature has a higher sticking point as an initial starting point for a user. And so there is a way that you can use incentivized traffic to basically pinpoint and push users directly to a feature and say, let's see how they engage. Let's put that credit event just after this feature and see, did we see an uptick in ROAS? Okay, let's A/B test. Let's go to that other feature and see how that performed over the first one. And then this can give you a sense of whether those features should be ordered differently or changed up. And I don't think anybody really uses incentivized traffic in this way, or at least they are starting to become more aware of the possibilities that this traffic provides.
I just want to get an understanding of the arsenal, so to speak, of capabilities for game devs, because leaderboard got that, stars, accomplishments got that, but this is evolving. This is getting really, really interesting. So I guess the ways of motivating people are expanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can think about your traditional feature set, right? I mean, you have this thing called player archetypes, and it's a very helpful sort of graphic, as you'll see, to help you understand whether your user base falls into one of these categories. Because once you understand that meta driver, you can start to build features which would support that. And of course, in casual, or I would say free-to-play games, our goal is to have as many of those motivational triggers as we can, because we never know the exact user type, right? Are you a competitive individual? Are you a social engineer? Are you looking for, collections? Just like, you don't know what's going to move that individual to make that purchase, and so you might as well have as many of those as possible. The problem is that you want to make sure that they balance each other out. So now you don't have one OP system that just, kind of breaks everything. Where does that fall into the kind of umbrella with incentivized traffic as we've been talking about? I think where we find ourselves today is that, unlike in the past, you actually have a way of putting a user directly into the path of whatever feature you want. And depending on how you've seen, and you can do breadcrumb analysis, you can look at, I just did this feature, what was the chain or the link that got that individual there? And you can kind of help guide that incent user through that journey and introducing all kind of different monetization points. But you can really see, okay, if I got a user to this point, knowing full well they have no intention of playing my game beyond this point, is this feature strong enough to convert that user into a long-term player? And then you get to start to see the impact of certain features as they relate to that maybe that fatui or that onboarding experience or whatever it might be. In non-incentivized traffic, you don't really get that. Why? Because you're not motivated beforehand. I don't know why you came to my game. Maybe you clicked on my banner. Maybe you like the art. Maybe there's 100 reasons why you might have actually clicked and installed my game, right? And so I cannot presuppose your motivation. But with incentivized traffic, I know exactly why you came. You came because you're going to get something else in somebody else's game. And so it's my job as a game designer to actually entice you to stay, to sort of delight you with something that you found. And you're like, wow, I didn't even realize this thing was here. And it's because of that gives us a little bit more control over the type of traffic that we're buying, all things being equal, of course.
What is the future of incentivized traffic? Where do you see this going? Mistplay believes it's going to be about real life rewards, i.e. cash. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, people want to earn money, and this industry has been built on the back of users since its inception, right? I mean, think about, I'm buying eyeballs, I'm generating, you think of an entire hyper casual business was built on the back of ads, and there's a lot of businesses who it's just passing the buck on to the next guy. Like I have an ad that it's arbitrage at the end of the day, and I think users never really understand their value, right? If I have a guy who spent $1,000 in my game, he's worth a lot of money in ad views or whatever. And so there's an incentive for me to want to try and make money from him. But then from the user's perspective, they never really understand that. They actually get no advantageous position for having that kind of high eCPM. They don't even know that. And so I see the future as being a little bit more democratized in the sharing of revenue. Like if I'm earning all this money from you, maybe you can earn some money too by taking these actions. And because the app stores are becoming so congested and things like features no longer kind of carry the same weight, people are looking for cheaper alternatives that can be more consistent. And so as we move into 2024 and as IDFA becomes less relevant, as Google ID becomes now is a little bit in peril, most of these companies, when it comes to this type of traffic, will start to look at that and say, okay, I've got a user's willing to do a lot more. For example, a user is willing to accept a cookie, right? If I tell you, in order to get your cash out, you need to have tracking enabled, they will enable tracking on the product that they go to. The way in which a person is going to view incentivized traffic is no longer going to be just a source of traffic that I need to kind of trick into playing my game. It's going to be, no, actually, I'm going to be able to know a lot more about these users. I'm going to be able to track their behavior much more effectively. And I'm going to be able to see how certain features and certain ad units and certain monetization tactics either improve or not my business and my LTV at the end of the day. And I can benchmark that against incentivized traffic, non-incentivized traffic, organic traffic, whatever it might be.
It's another signal. It's not even just another source of revenue, which it is. But when I'm hearing you talk about it, the signal is really important here too.
Yeah, it's one of the few moments where a game developer can really speak to an individual prior to them entering their product, and then have a generalized sense of, okay, I have these people coming and actually know exactly why they're here. It's this, we work in a very strange industry in which basically nobody ever meets their customer physically or even virtually. And so you never really understand why, like, why are you here? What are you doing? Yeah, there's some companies that have internal survey teams and, looking for consumer insights and yada, yada. But again, always biased and always a little bit, kind of a percentage of whatever, versus like a store. You walk into a store, you're like, how can I help you? I'm looking for this. Like, okay, it's over there. And okay, now you go over to this direction. And then you're like, a lot of people are coming in for that one thing. Maybe if I put it in the front of the store, I get even more people coming in. Oh, now they're just looking at it at the window. Actually, it was that they were looking at that thing and they were getting all the way to the back of my store and they were passing all these other things that were really exciting. And then that's what actually got them. So I should put, we always talk about this in the US, right? Like, why do they put the milk in the back of the store? Everybody needs milk. It actually turns out not to be because of this, it's because they need it to be cold and they can't transfer it to the front. But it has this unintended consequence, which is that if you got to get milk, you got to walk all the way to the back of the store. And you're going to walk by all these different products, and that's a big draw. And I think incentivized traffic can be seen similarly.
Understanding this is also getting away from that other stigma, which was, if I have ads in my game, if I have too many of this or that, I'm doing something to the experience. This is like adapting the experience to the user. So no one's really going to be that ticked off that they're seeing this, because their behavior says, you're a completionist or you want to accomplish this in the game. So here's your chance.
Back when we were all children and we were watching TV and there were advertisements on TV, you watched them because you didn't have an alternative, or you enjoyed the program. You didn't change the channel necessarily because you were enjoying the program. You wanted to. How many times did you run to the bathroom, in between commercial breaks so that you could get back to whatever, you stayed because you enjoyed the content. And so ad breaks were placed at important moments, and people understood that, look, I'm going to put this here because it's a cliffhanger, and now you're going to come back. When we come back, you'll be back. And I think game developers kind of lost a little bit of that thinking process, right? Like, when should I show an ad? How do I integrate this into my process? And they became went one direction, which is like, we'll just throw as many ads as possible, and then it doesn't matter. Then again, your retention suffers. But if you have a good product and you do it effectively, it doesn't matter. Players will want to play your game and they'll watch the ads in order to play it. So I think that stigma is dying out. But on the other hand, games aren't as innovative as they used to be, if I'm completely honest. But that's for another topic of conversation.
That really is.
There's a whole show in that.
That's a different show entirely.
We could keep going, I think, for the rest of the afternoon if we really tried, because this is a topic that I think both Peggy and I are finding deeply, deeply fascinating. However, we're going to have to call a halt to it for the time being. Before we say goodbye, we do have a couple of questions we ask all of our guests. The first is, what game are you playing right now? What's obsessing you? What are you spending a lot of time on when maybe you should be going out and networking and having a coffee with people? And then the second one, what's your favorite game of all time?
Okay. Well, the game that I'm playing at the moment is not a new game. In fact, it's an extension from Call of Duty from 2013, which is it's just a local play. I play with the guys in my office. It's like kill the aliens and get to the end. And we haven't managed to get to the end yet. So I'm doing it more because I'm just want to connect with the guys in my office and have a little break from the kind of mayhem of the day. And then my favorite game of all time, man, that's a tricky one. I mean, I think probably the one, you see the poster behind me, Super Mario Bros. 3, just in terms of nostalgic, kind of like where it hits in the heart. Like, I hear that music, that game had everything for me. So I'm probably going to have to say that, Super Mario Bros. 3.
Well, this has been, I have to say, a great, great show, Adam. It has given us insights into not just different ways to design a game, but also monetize a game. That's where all the focus is right now, because that is where the challenge is. So insights like this, they are helpful. And I side with Brian. We will definitely have you back because our audience appreciates that. I think that's why they come here, and they'll get more of you as well. So thanks for taking the time.
Absolute pleasure.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Ann Saltz, and that's a wrap until next week.